Welcome to Demming Chronicles Season 2. Our aim is to change behavior by changing the conversation. We chat with persons whose ideas and opinions will make a tremendous difference. They're persons who take risk and show us a way that we could try to live in many different areas. Today's program, we welcome Dr. Marlene Attzs. Welcome, Dr. Attzs.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Thank you. And we also welcome Adeline Gregoire. Welcome, Adeline.
Thanks for inviting me here, Denise. A pleasure.
Demming Chronicles Season 2. We'll be back with you shortly. Welcome back to Demming Chronicles and welcome, Dr. Atz. Tell us, how are you today?
Oh, I am happy to be alive. I feel blessed and highly favored. It's a great day to be in the Caribbean. Looks as if we're going to get some showers later, but it's a pretty sunny day and a good Caribbean day.
Lovely. What do you understand to be Trinidad and Tobago's strategy for sustainable development?
Well, before I get into the specifics of Trinidad and Tobago's strategy, I wanted to talk a little bit about what sustainable development really is, because I think people often equate sustainable development with issues that are solely pertinent to environmental management. And environmental management is just one subset of the conversation around sustainable development. Formally, the conversation or the term sustainable development, I think, was 1972 or thereabout, something called the Brundtland Commission, where there was a global recognition that the world was expanding its footprint, so to speak, through industrialization. And we were expanding that footprint and at the cost of the environment. So there was environmental degradation as economies grew and as we had all of this industrialization. And the people-centered part of the environment, apart from the natural environment, the people part was also being lost in the quest for industrialization and for countries to essentially accumulate significant amounts of wealth and position themselves as economic powers. So the priority at that time was on the economy. So a group of scientists decided, well, we kind of need to put a stop to this, and under the umbrella of the United Nations, started a conversation on environment and development. And of course, out of that came the conversation around sustainable development, which formally defined really talks about ensuring that the current generation is able to prosper and do well and self-actualize, but not doing that at the cost of future generations. So you want to ensure that we have what we call intragenerational equity, so that all of us can kind of, be comfortable. We reduce levels of inequalities and inequities among ourselves, but that we also ensure that future generations can enjoy the spoils of the environment and enjoy the earth as it was. So that is the formal definition about sustainable development, but it really talks about ensuring that even as you try to achieve economic growth and economic prosperity, using environmental resources, you must not forget people. So there's a social dimension, an economic dimension, and an environmental dimension. And that intersecting space inside of those three dimensions is really what we try to talk about when we talk about sustainable development. So with that as a kind of backdrop, enter Trinidad and Tobago, where our economic space is heavily defined by our exploitation of the natural environment, oil and gas. And the idea behind that exploitation in the context of sustainable development means that whatever windfalls we get from oil and gas now, we should not deplete all of those windfalls, economic windfalls, money, revenues that we earn. We should ensure that there is something left for future generations. Enter the Heritage and Stabilization Fund that we have in Trinidad and Tobago. The idea behind what those things that are called sovereign wealth funds, the Heritage and Stabilization Fund is ours, but in the larger sense, they're called sovereign wealth funds. So you put aside some of the rents, some of the revenues that you get from non-renewable resources like oil and gas, and ensure that future generations have it. In our case in Trinidad and Tobago, not quite what is happening, because the heritage and stabilization are intertwined So we're not too sure if we're leaving anything behind for future generations in terms of the heritage part, because we are drawing down on the funds in the Heritage and Stabilization Fund to help us kind of navigate the specific circumstances that we find ourselves in now, where the economic scenario for Trinidad and Tobago is not at its healthiest because of what is happening in the global energy sector. But so that is a context for us. But formally, in a formal sense, the government of the day has identified a national development strategy, our sustainable development strategy, in the Vision 2030 document that the government has penned, and it has identified a number of thematic areas that it wants to look at, covering the environment, covering the economic space, and covering the people space. So in a formal sense, that is what Trinidad and Tobago's sustainable development strategy is. That document, the National Development Strategy, embodies what is supposed to be our strategy document for Trinidad and Tobago.
Mm-hmm. You've talked about it in the formal sense, but is it being practiced? Is that what we are actually doing?
Personally, I don't think that we really are on a path to sustainable development. Now, having said that, let me put some context to what I'm saying. When COVID-19 essentially hit our shores in February, March of 2020, we had to abandon the best laid plans, so to speak, and deal with that particular crisis. Now, the good thing about COVID-19, to my mind, is that COVID-19 allowed us to unearth a lot of the chinks in our armor in Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, the most obvious one is that COVID-19 showed us how really unequal things were. And, not everybody in Trinidad and Tobago is enjoying the same quality of life. And I don't mean now in an economic sense. So one of the most obvious areas where the inequalities manifested themselves was in terms of the education sector. So predominantly children in our public education space, were not able to transition equally with as great efficiency as children in the private education space to online teaching. So you had issues of access to technology. Students didn't have tablets, students didn't have internet, students had dodgy internet, our teachers weren't able to navigate the space, parents had to either grapple with losing their jobs or staying at home to look after their children, to get them onto the internet. Some of them could not abandon their jobs because the jobs are what paid them the money so that they could have the data so children could be online. So it was a chicken and egg situation. And I think COVID-19 really has shown that with the best laid plans, as might be captured in our national development strategy, there is still much work to be done. In preparation for today's session, and I was looking at the national development strategy, and in the preamble, in his statement in the beginning of the national development strategy, Vision 2030, the Prime Minister said, and this document was crafted in 2016. Shortly after the PNM administration assumed leadership. And he says, the government is committed to making tough decisions to get the economy back on the road to prosperity and sustainable development. We're also committed to those of our citizens who are unable to cope effectively with more difficult circumstances and have put measures in place to cushion the landing of the vulnerable groups in society who would be most challenged by the downturn in economic activity. And at that time, when the PNM administration assumed leadership, we were dealing simply with depressed oil prices. So 2016, fast forward to 2020, we're dealing with further depressed oil prices, but we're now dealing also with inequalities. We're also dealing with a health crisis, a pandemic. And really, when we started COVID-19 and our Herculean effort at addressing this pandemic as it impacted on our economic space and our national space, all of the protocols, social distance. So if I'm living in a house, where it's 4 of us in a one room, how are we really going to do the social distancing? Wash your hands frequently. Well, I haven't had water for a while. So, how do I justify to myself or to my mother, to whoever it is, that you're washing your hands every 5 minutes because, it's one of the protocols, etc., etc., etc. So to me, COVID-19 laid bare some of the challenges that we face if we are to talk about sustainable development in a real sense in Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, our national development strategies juxtaposed to the Sustainable Development Goals that the United Nations, many countries around the world, including Trinidad and Tobago, we've signed on to those Sustainable Development Goals to achieve them by 2030. And one of those Sustainable Development Goals, of course, is to eradicate poverty, increase in gender equality, etc., access to early childhood. So it's really a suite of things that we're dealing with, both at the national space and in the international space. And I think our challenges now are even greater. So when the Prime Minister did his opening remarks to the National Development Strategy, it was at a time when we were talking simply about depressed oil prices. Now we're talking about depressed oil prices, the impact of COVID-19 on our economy, the fact that we have higher levels of unemployment now because of the lockdown measures that we've taken in Trinidad and Tobago, and the impact that is having on people. So it is really a very complex situation and a complex conversation.
It is. And Dr. Atz, in the light of that complexity and in the light of what you've talked about, the sovereign funds, if you could introduce a policy change, what would that be?
That's an easy one. We need to have data. We need to have data to guide our decisions. We need not to speak through color-coded lenses, which is what we do in Trinidad and Tobago. We choose a color and we speak to whatever that color requires us to speak of. And I think if we are to achieve, and we have talented people, and we have, when I say talented and resilient, I often talk about Carnival. I love Carnival, and I often talk about the fact that we can in a month or two create things that are unimaginable. Your sleepless night, it's not a sleep Ash Wednesday because you are working towards a particular goal. So we are resilient. I don't think that Trinis, we are vulnerable, yes, but we also have a certain kind of fortitude. But I think to take us forward in a very honest way to help us achieve the development trajectory that has been articulated in the National Development Strategy, but certainly for us to ensure that each citizen has an opportunity to self-actualize, which is what I see development as, that you have the opportunity to self-actualize. We really need to have appropriate data so that we can identify where the chinks are in our armor so that we can address those chinks to give everybody a fighting chance. I think that is what I would like to see as a policy change, that we really get serious about data and having data-driven decisions that help all of us in Trinidad and Tobago. There will always be some gaps, and and I think we're not asking for utopia. I think we're just asking for everybody to have a fighting chance to self-actualize so that they can enjoy what development means, and certainly what sustainable development means.
That issue of data has been a troubling one. And although we have a ministry with a responsibility for the digitization of the country, we seem to have an implementation strategy, an implementation issue. Do you have any comments on why does it take us so long? Why do we have such challenges with implementation?
I think there's a general lethargy. I mean, if you look at things like the Ease of Doing Business Index, it will talk about the same things over and over. The fact that we have these bottlenecks in our system. And I was reflecting the other day, I think someone asked me a question, and I was saying, now is the time, now that things are essentially a little slower. So our public service, people often talk about the public service. I started off my career as a public servant. I mean, long before I actually went into the field of economics, I worked with Frank Rampersad. I'm probably dating myself here. I worked with Frank Rampersad, who was a consummate public servant. I mean, he was the economist extraordinaire for Trinidad and Tobago, and he was an advisor to people like Eric Williams and that sort of thing. So I know the public service has a tremendous capacity, and I was saying that perhaps during this time of COVID, where you have remote work and people not being at their offices, etc., because of the COVID protocols and the regulations that are in place, why not use this quiet time to enhance the skill set so that we can essentially move the digital process forward faster. But instead of that, you still have, you know, paper trails. And I think there is a level of comfort seeing things in black and white. I think it requires a cultural shift. It requires a pivoting in terms of how we see things and where we see ourselves. But for some reason, there is a comfort, and maybe the comfort in the paper in that it allows us to blame the paper trails for the lethargy and for the bottlenecks that we're seeing in some of our systems and our processes. So why there is a particular organization, a particular company, I wanted to do something online, and yes, you can fill out the form and everything online, and then you have to print it and take it into the nearest office. And I'm saying, but that defeats the purpose. That defeats the purpose. I don't understand what that means. So what happens if I don't have a printer? You know, I hear about all of these conversations about old age pensioners, you know, you're wanting them to go online and to fill out these forms and all these things. And I'm saying, hang on a moment. I mean, how are these people going to navigate that space? Because there are two things. One, our older citizens have a comfort with a bank book and a piece of paper. That is how they have been schooled. That is their comfort level. So to ask them to transition to an online system, one, they may not be able to transition easily, but two, they may not be comfortable. So I think the two things have to coexist until we build a sufficiently robust platform that people feel comfortable that they can trust this particular platform. But as I said, I think the digitalization really is something that requires a cultural mindset, but I think it also needs to start with our education system. So we need to build that into our education system, those platforms, and build that infrastructure, and also build the mindset before we start talking about a digitalization, because there will still be some persons in the country, and I'm saying us because it's us, this is our country, who will be left behind. Who will be left behind because they simply are not able to cope with it. You know, I go into ATM sometimes, and someone is in front of you, and they're taking a really long time to press 4 numbers, and then you have to say, okay, all right, so let us examine. This is not someone person doesn't look like 75 or 80 years old. So you're asking yourself, well, what has gone wrong? Why this person who seems to be 25, 30, 40 is having such a challenge navigating that space. So to me, it's something that is a work in progress, but we have to have all of these supporting infrastructure to get the digitalization platform to where we would like it to be.
And on that note, we bring this interview to a wrap. A conversation that speaks about what sustainability is, not just economic sustainability, but the context. It also went into the issues of how do we transform our society using digitalization and some of the human problems that exist. Dr. Marlene Attzs, thank you for being part of Demming Chronicles. Until next time, be safe. Demming Chronicles Season 2. Welcome to our guest, Adeline Gregoire. Adeline, tell me, what keeps you inspired?
Hi, Denise. Thanks again for having me. What keeps me inspired? I would definitely say stories of human resilience, everyday stories of human strength, and how, you know, just anyone is just showing up. A lot of people are just showing up and making change in their own communities and not waiting for anyone. I think definitely as well, stories of other people, when you see on the news, for example, of folks who are very much woke and very aware of the connections between our past, our present, and our future.
Lovely. Adeline, I know that you're involved in Women Everywhere and you're involved in women's issues. A male friend of mine recently complained to me that women have had a female prime minister, we have a female president, we have lots of female judges. And he asked almost in exasperation, what else do you women want? How would you answer that?
Well, first of all, Denise, to be very honest, I'd love to meet him. I'd really love to meet him. To sort of just reassure him that this is not a question of some whim or fancy. This is not a luxury that we're asking for as women requesting our seat at the table. Equality, somehow has come to be understood as something more, as something that, men are doing us a favor as women by granting us equality. I'd like to remind people that, equality is our birthright. It's inscribed in the Declaration of Human Rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is each human being is born equal. And so when we are speaking about equality, we're really talking about, and we need to put the emphasis on the fact that this is what we are born with, and this is what it is inalienable. It's non-negotiable. A second, it always is a mystery to me why men, they always feel as though there's a sense of exasperation. And I really, honestly, with all the work that we're doing at Women Everywhere and just being part of this feminist thought space, I think it's very interesting and it's necessary to find out what exactly is the source of this exasperation. Where is the fear coming from? When we're simply asking, a fair chance at life, a fair chance at having equal opportunity, equal pay, equal access,
But when we look at our parliament, 30% of our parliament are women. So what he is seeing, what the society is seeing, is that the equality doesn't really exist in the society. You're not seeing women equally operating in the spaces. How do you feel about that 30%?
Absolutely. And so 30% is definitely a great start for a country of 1.3 million people. It's a good start. However, we're far from what is acceptable, I would say. And for the very simple reason that worldwide and even in Trinidad and Tobago, women constitute 50% of the population. That means that our leadership, as well as our decision making, our politicians, our authorities, these are the systems and these are the groups that need to reflect that equity, that share of 50% a male perspective, 50% a men's perspective, and 50% a woman's perspective. And it's actually even broader than that. In 2021, our main question and what we should really be more concerned about is how are our institutions reflecting our ever evolving and more diverse society. And that's what I'm actually concerned about, beyond the equity and the equality of 50%, male and 50% representation of females. How are our institutions truly a reflection of the societies that they're leading?
And you've asked a brilliant question, and can I ask you to answer that question? Our institutions really reflective of the population?
Well, so that's I think definitely the most simplest answer right now, as we see again in 2021, I don't think that we have the institutions or the infrastructure that truly reflects our diverse society. Something very recent, a very recent accomplishment has been the win for the LGBTQIA community in Trinidad and Tobago. This is very recent. However, it has taken us a long time to get there. And, we need to be a little more proactive and a little more connected to the way that the world is evolving, I believe. And really, stay tuned to what are the changes happening and how are our citizens and how is the human being evolving? And what are the needs that need to be met for each individual? Yes. So this is actually where, I'd like to see the conversation. But as is, I don't think we're there yet. There's a lot of work to be done.
Are there any policy decisions that you would like to see implemented to get us to where we ought to be?
So I think definitely for me as a woman in Trinidad and Tobago, as a Caribbean woman, my very first concern is always that of protection and safety. It's unfortunate to say, but in our own country, in my own country, I don't feel safe as a woman. And so my perspective or my request to the authorities and institutions and powers that be would always be that we place protection of the human being and protection by extension of all our citizens, and especially our women and girls, at the core of every policy, all of the policies for that matter, that we are thinking up, that we are putting in place. A second concern for me when we speak about policy making is how do our policies address the question of poverty and poverty eradication. For me, these must be the drivers behind any specific policy. And just as an umbrella for those two items, that because there are many policy changes that need to be made, but there must be a guiding vision. And a vision needs to be centered in the humanness of this experience and the fact that we are dealing with human beings. Our visions need to be rooted in well-being. How are we making our society a place where each one of our citizens can thrive? And we are really focused on leveling the playing field. For me, these are things that you can start with a million policies and you can have the best intentions, but if there's no vision, that's driving those policies, we're actually pretty much in 5 years and 10 years, we're just, as we say in Trinidad, we're spinning top in mud. We're not going anywhere.
And Adeline, as we bring this interview almost to a close, what would have to happen for you to feel safer and more protected in our society?
Definitely, I would say there's a question of a cultural shift that needs to happen. There's also the acknowledgement that things such as gender equality that we're asking for, these are actually not so minor issues. And I think this is where the whole mindset and the whole way that we view the world and what women are asking for, what our citizens are asking for, it's our entire response to those requests that needs to change. And so for me to feel protected and to feel safe, for example, in Trinidad and Tobago, I need to be speaking to people who understand why I don't feel safe. If I'm stranded or if there's a power outage, if there's a power cut, for example, I need to know that, for example, when I show up at the police station or if I need help, there's a specific structure that I can go to. There's a hotline I can call. Even without the power outage, if for some reason I'm lost, or I'm just alone, or I'm late for an appointment, or I can't get public transport home, where is the Wi-Fi access nationwide? How am I going to? There are the little things that are, infrastructural changes. We need to be investing in protective policies, actually. Protective structures, whether it's physical, whether it's digital aspect of things, and also just ensuring that all of our citizens are on the same page and that women's security and women's safety and just the general protection of our population it's a big deal and it's very vital to our own survival. It's as simple as that.
And on that note, Adeline, what would be your parting comments for the persons looking at this interview, or for my male friend who's totally exasperated?
Okay, so let's let's maybe deal with your friend first. I think let's sit down, let's hear each other out. We have statistics, we have research that could really show you that the development and the progress of a society is intrinsically linked to the way our citizens are treated, the access to opportunities that our citizens have, and very specifically, the measure of how we treat our women and girls and the opportunities that we afford to our women and girls determines to an extremely large extent the success and the progress of a society. So if our aim is to be a progressive society, and if we're really striving to make this twin island nation of Trinidad and Tobago the very best paradise, that exists, and the very best country for all of us, these are the things that we need to be considering. And for everyone, I would part with basically the watchwords of Women Everywhere: diversity, solidarity, and inclusion. We need to be striving for a world where no one is left behind, and really just everyone show up in your best way, show up as your best self, and make the changes that you're able to do, even, in a very small way.
And on that note, we bring this interview to an end. Demming Chronicles, like and share our editions, reach out to us, comment on us. Demming Chronicles Season 2. Be safe.